Hello, I'm John Belcher from the law offices of John A. Belcher. This is the first in a new series of videos, The History of Rock and Roll and the Law. Lawyers and rockers go way back. And in fact, perhaps because they're artists or perhaps because of their lifestyles, there are a lot of stories about how the court systems and how litigants interact with bands. And our first video is going to address a case called Meredith Hunter versus the Rolling Stones. Meredith Hunter was an attendee at the Altamont concert put on by the Rolling Stones in 1969. He's dead. He died at the concert, and in fact, there is a movie called Gimme Shelter that was financed by the Stones, and you can see at least a portion of the murder itself, which is very chilling. What happened was the Stones were out of money. Their manager, notwithstanding their touring and their success, really had left them with very little cash, so they did an American tour. And Mick Jagger had a vision that they were going to do a film. The Bay Area was going to be the climax of the film with a free concert, a la Woodstock. And Jagger felt that he could negotiate with the mayor of San Francisco and find an appropriate venue, but nothing doing. Then there were some other places, for example, Sears Point Raceway in Sonoma, that had appropriate fencing and that could have controlled the crowd. But Sears Point wanted money, and the Stones said no. So having announced the show and having a need to give this recorded concert that had already been announced, they found a piece of land at Altamont Speedway, which is out of the way back towards Livermore, 50 plus miles out of San Francisco. And the preparations were a mess. The security, because the Rolling Stones didn't like cops, was delegated down to Hell's Angels. And the crowd control was essentially non-existent from what we would consider to be an appropriate, modern view. There was not appropriate facilities, bathrooms, food, and so on. Bill Wyman of the Stones was shopping in San Francisco, and the crowd was getting very rowdy. The Hells Angels were beginning to get out of control. That blood was drawn from Stephen Still's leg. Marty Balin was hit by the Angels, and trouble was brewing. Meredith Hunter, a black man with a white girlfriend, had a gun in his waist that he pulled out, and he was stabbed in the neck repeatedly by one of the Hells Angels security detail. The Angels were saying, let him die, but some friends of his came and carried him back to the stage. Well, there was a helicopter waiting to take the Stones to San Francisco Airport, but rather than use it for emergency medical relief, the Stones never released the helicopter to take him, Mr. Hunter, to receive appropriate treatment, nor was an ambulance promptly called. The Stones hightailed it out of town, and in fact didn't seem too broken up by the death at the concert, and in fact ultimately 1.7 million in cash from the proceeds of all their tour was put into a handbag, which Mick Jagger flew to Europe and deposited in a Swiss bank account. So the mother of Meredith Hunter filed a lawsuit against the Stones, and in fact, it was served by throwing the summons at the feet of Mick Jagger as he boarded an airplane. You may wonder what ultimately happened, because the planning and the organization of the event was, certainly negligent. The case ultimately settled for $10,000, and the lesson at a certain level is that litigation doesn't begin when you file a lawsuit, and it doesn't end when you get a judgment. In fact, the Stones had stiffed multiple hotels, they'd stiffed multiple vendors all along the way, and had retreated back to Europe. And whether or not the case would have resulted in a judgment, it functionally wasn't collectible at the time. The case is remarkable for how not to run a rock and roll concert. And having been to a number of Rolling Stones concerts, including the last time they rolled through Los Angeles, that's not how they're done today. John Belcher, Rock and Roll in the Wall.